it's truly a pleasure to be here. We always say it's a pleasure or a privilege, but there's a very special feeling this evening, and I'll explain why in a moment. It relates not only to this wonderful and important publication, but also the very, very special venue, this very special place where we're convening this evening. Before I begin, I'll acknowledge country and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where we are meeting this evening, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. Pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. But also I'm going to acknowledge this place because before we get to the heart of the matter and talk about undersea cables and challenges to Australia's critical infrastructure, it's worth noting that this is the first event in, I believe, 6.5 years to be held here at the heart of the Australian National University campus, University House. I want to particularly thank and acknowledge Professor Peter Konofsky, who's here with us this evening, who's the master of University House, and who, among his many other professional responsibilities, has overseen, I think, the outstanding refurbishment, restoration of this building, which of course was severely damaged in the hailstorm in January 2020. Now, this is kind of a soft re-emergence for University House because the big official event will be this Friday when the university launches its strategy. But it is truly an honour for the National Security College to be holding this event here this evening. It just is really a testament to the audacity and the persistence of my team in making sure they book the best venues as early as possible. Peter, thank you very much for hosting us here this evening. Now to the matter at hand. We're launching this evening, I think, a very important report, a National Security College occasional paper, Connected and Protected, looking at submarine cables that are vital to Australia's interests, but also vital to regional connectivity in the Indo-Pacific. We have 3 of the 5 authors on stage, and you'll hear more from them in just a moment. And I believe that one or perhaps both of our other authors are here lurking in the room. There are many other contributors to the report as well. But this report is, I think, a pretty important accomplishment, not only for the authors, but for the team at the National Security College that have driven its launch and publication exceptionally timely. It was only a few months ago that the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister Richard Marles and other ministers at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore were bringing the protection of undersea cables, protection of subsea infrastructure to the forefront of the regional security agenda. Elsewhere in the world, in the Baltic, clearly also around Taiwan, we've seen already very clear threats to submarine cables. I think we can speculate about the actors behind those risks and threats. But that brings our attention to the fundamental dependence of the Australian economy and the continuity of our society and way of life on this vital infrastructure, which of course is only being amplified as demand for data, as the AI revolution is upon us. The paper that we're launching this evening was supported through a strategic policy grant from the Department of Defence. And so I'm particularly appreciative that we have Major General Jason Walk here this evening, I think representing Chief of Defence Force, and I believe other colleagues from the department as well. And although the grant was in fact run through one of our kindred institutions, the Australia-India Institute at the University of Melbourne, the National Security College was very pleased to take a lead on the publication side. And I understand there are other publications emerging from this grant as we speak. And there are hard-hitting recommendations in this report, which we'll hear more about in a moment from the authors. It's a very well-structured report, rich in recommendations. I know that policymakers will perhaps have to be pretty ruthless in setting priorities based on those recommendations. But I think this is a wake-up call regarding questions of risks, but also responsibilities across the Australian system for this vital part of our national infrastructure. And as a final observation from me, it is striking that in our community consultations, which we published at the National Security College earlier this year, not only is it clear that the Australian community, the Australian public recognises critical infrastructure as deeply at risk from strategic shocks, but it's our understanding as well from our engagement with policymakers and officials that there is acute awareness of this within the security community as well. That's enough from me. We have three authors to introduce and speak more about a report that I think has been covered this week in not only the Australian, but also the Global Times. So clearly we're doing something right at generating diverse interest and debate in the issue. The three authors that we have on stage, and I'll go to them in turn to offer some remarks on this project. Firstly, Dr. David Brewster. And Dr. Brewster, of course, is a senior research fellow with the National Security College, a long-time contributor not only to our work, but a leader in the policy debate on Indo-Pacific, Indian Ocean and maritime security in Australia, also holding an affiliation with the Australia-India Institute. We have also Dr. Samuel Bashfield, and Sam is a former colleague at the National Security College. I can't believe we let you go, but sometimes having completed one's PhD, you go on to even greater things elsewhere in our ecosystem. Sam remains a close friend and collaborator of the college. He's a research fellow in global security at La Trobe University and has done really path-breaking work, again, on Indian Ocean security, including the importance of its history. He's now delivering a lot of dialogue as well. And then thirdly, on our panel this evening, it's a real pleasure to welcome Jocelyn Kang, who's the founder and managing director of Nodalis, a boutique national security consultancy working across cyber, geopolitical risk, digital resilience, and I know your experience in the private sector, ASPI as well, has helped inform that great work. So I'm going to hand to our panellists for their framing remarks. We're going to keep this relatively short and sweet this evening. This is a standing room event, so we won't build in a Q&A into the formal proceedings, but be sure to stick around and ambush our authors with your sharp questions afterwards, and I'm sure you'll get even more frank assessments from them off the record. But on that note, I'm going to throw the floor to David Brewster. Thank you.
Thanks, Rory, and good evening. It's great to be here to discuss a new report, Connected and Protected, which looks at the challenges and the opportunities in relation to Australia's submarine cable system. I'll start by thanking my co-authors, Sam Bashfield, Jocelyn Kang, Mike Constable, and Anthony Bergen for their work in putting this together. We bring together a wide range of expertise which reflects the diverse nature of the problem. And I'd like to thank also the NSC team for their great support in publishing this report. I hope that this will provide a useful resource for the many people that will be working on this issue in coming years. I should say also that as far as I am aware, this is the first published report anywhere in the world that seeks to provide a comprehensive assessment of a national cable system. So I'm sure that it will provide a useful template for a lot of work being done by many of our partners. I've got limited time to talk today, but I'll briefly mention three things: importance of submarine cables to Australia, threats, and what should we do about it. So, as many of us will know, there are 16 submarine cables which carry around 99% of Australia's international communications. 16 cables, all of which are about, I think, have a diameter of about that. There's some demo cables sitting on the front table there if anyone's interested. And these cables carry vast amount of data that are essential for the operation of most businesses, governments, and indeed for daily life. deeply embedded in our daily lives. And I'd guess most computer systems that we use in one way or another depend on international communications to operate properly. Indeed, if international communications were severely disrupted, we would find out very quickly how much of our daily life would come to a halt, maybe even starting with trying to pay for your morning coffee, for example. Unfortunately, there are at the moment no meaningful alternatives to submarine cables for our international communications. With existing technology, satellite communications simply do not have the bandwidth to carry anywhere near the amount of data that we transmit back and forth from Australia. All of our commercial submarine cables are privately owned and operated, meaning that government has only a very limited influence over investment and operational decisions. And that's really a key point that we have to bear in mind in all of this in talking about what governments can and can't do. As discussed in the report, the submarine cables industry is going through some really major changes that we have to take into account in understanding what we can do. Submarine cables were once the domain of telecommunications companies linking major population centres, in telephone calls and the like. And now the great majority of international investment in new cables is from a small group of foreign technology companies, the so-called hyperscalers, Google, Meta, Microsoft, and Amazon, who are building links not between population centres, but between their own data centres in different countries. And they will soon, very soon, dominate Australia's international connectivity. The other major change to the industry is a bifurcation between Chinese and non-Chinese companies in terms of operation of cables and the supply of all the components and repair of cables as well. And this is largely driven, obviously, by concerns about the strategic leverage which cables provide. Now, these developments will affect Australia in a number of ways, some of them bad, some of them good. But certainly there is an opportunity, if we get the policy levers right, to position Australia as a key regional hub in Indo-Pacific connectivity. And that is a good thing for Australia. So let me say a few words about threats. As the global security environment deteriorates, there's a real risk, as we know, that Australia will become involved in sustained tensions, potentially hybrid warfare, and potentially even outright conflict. The one thing that we do know is that in that case, Australia's international cables are likely to be one of the first targets of any adversary. There have been a number of incidents of cable disruptions in Europe and around Taiwan, many of which have been unofficially attributed to state actors such as Russia and China. These incidents have usually involved ships just simply dragging their anchors across the cables, which shows you how such low-tech actions can have big results. The recent incidents in Perth on Saturday night, which many of you may have heard about, and I think my colleague Sam will talk about a little bit later, just shows how easy it is for a determined adversary to cut Australia's international communication links. Securing cables against physical attack requires complex systems of deterrence, surveillance, and response. And we should not underrate how difficult this problem is. European countries are currently struggling with trying to secure their cable links across the Baltic, and Australia has much vaster maritime spaces to be concerned about. So it's a major problem and would require determined action. The report also gives significant emphasis to cyber threats. In our view, Australia's geographic challenges which are not only challenges for us, but also challenges for a potential adversary, means that an adversary may find it more effective to use cyber to attack a range of targets, including operator management systems, power systems, etc. Cyber could allow an adversary to attack many targets at the same time and potentially inflict much greater and much more long-lasting damage to cables than a simple cable cut. Unfortunately, Australia is not well positioned currently to address this problem. Our approach to promoting the security and resilience of our international communication system, frankly, is not currently fit for purpose. As a nation, we've only just begun to take this threat seriously, and we do not have the adequate structures for governance and protection of cables, and nor do we have adequate capabilities to detect and respond to threats. As that report indicates, there are many government agencies and departments with responsibilities for submarine cables, but in our view, there is no clear understanding of responsibilities, and there is no agency taking a leading role in cable security. There are also serious gaps in the patchwork of Australia's laws relating to cables. It's a complex area, but it is also clear that there are substantial gaps in legal authority of maritime law enforcement agencies. There are also serious inadequacies in the relationship between private sector that own and operate the cables and the various agencies that are responsible for their security. Liaison between operators and relevant agencies is ad hoc, patchy, and informal. So what do we do about this? My colleagues will discuss some of the more specific recommendations, but I'll touch on a few overarching themes of the report. First is to clarify who is responsible for what. We need to nominate one agency to take the lead in coordinating national responses to threats against cables. We argue that the Maritime Border Command within ABF is the entity that is best placed to take a leading role in coordinating a response to physical threats against cables, working with other relevant agencies. There are a few reasons for this. MBC is already responsible for coordinating responses to a range of maritime security threats, again, working with other agencies in the maritime domain. It also has the unique ability to bring together civilian and military capabilities in surveillance and response. The civilian status of Border Force could also be a valuable factor in allowing the Australian government to respond to threats in a relatively non-escalatory manner. And of course, all of this raises significant issues of resourcing. Second, we also need to ensure that the cables industry is firmly embedded in national policy towards cables. Although the cables industry does work closely with policymakers on communications policy, it has few formal links with relevant security agencies. In this report, we've recommended that an advisory body should be established that brings together the major industry players, together with key security agencies, not only to discuss policy, but also to work together in evaluating and coordinating responses to incidents. Third, in our view, the importance of submarine cables to Australia and the threats that we face and the opportunities, the major economic opportunities that exist in relation to cables, means that we should have a national strategy on cables. This would provide a comprehensive approach, comprehensive guidance for policymakers and stakeholders to promote resilience, evaluate threats, and coordinate responses. But just as importantly, the changes that we're seeing in the international cables industry create many opportunities for Australia to position itself, as I mentioned, as the key Indo-Pacific cables hub. And to my mind, by far the best defense to threats against cables is to build redundancy and diversity in our international connections, and establishing ourselves as an international hub is the fastest way to achieve that. So it will be in Australia's interest to maximise new investment in cables with not only with geographic diversity, but just as importantly, with diversity of ownership, including not only foreign ownership, but also Australian ownership. And we certainly need to get the policy settings right to achieve this result. So I'll leave those remarks there and hand over to my colleague, Jocelyn Kang.
I really want to show how very much subsea cables are cyber assets. They're cyber assets and they're a cyber security issue. And the reason for this is because not of the physical cable, but the precious data, the precious money-making data that flows through those cables. Now, without subsea cables, Australia would be without international connectivity. And for our island nation, that means no internet. So just imagine, businesses can't take payments. Individuals can't get cash out of an ATM. Aeroplanes are delayed. Transport, maybe it's cancelled. And those people can't get to work to make that money to take the cash out of the ATM. I didn't imagine that. That happened in Tasmania in 2022. 2 of their 3 submarine cables were cut accidentally, and that's what happened. And at that same event, 000 had to be diverted into this third remaining cable. So luckily, they had a power cable with a very small comms cable, but it was there. They had that redundancy to fall back on. So thinking about the cyber threat vectors, I think you need to, in order to understand this, I think you need a basic understanding of what subsea cable system looks like. So we often think of it just as the cable, but it's more than just the cable. It's the cable. There are repeaters along the line to amplify the signal. It comes up onto land, into buildings that are cable landing stations, and there are important equipment inside those landing stations. And so what equipment is there? It's networking equipment to make that data transfer across the cable. There is power equipment to power the repeaters. And then there is the network management system. This network management system is like a central brain which can control and that people use to control and monitor the subsea cable system. Now, I want you to remember this network management system for a bit later. But think, there are essentially it boils down to 2 ways that you can interfere with the subsea cable system. You could intercept the data, or you could disrupt the flow of data. Now, if a threat actor wanted to intercept the data, they would need to get physical access to the cable, which is in the sea, buried or really deep, like 2,000 meters deep or more, or they could access it on land. And the place they would access it on land is where the equipment is, at the cable landing station. And that's why we think the cable landing station is an important asset to protect. Fortunately, many of the new cable systems that are landing in data centers, which traditionally have had better physical access controls. Now, this doesn't stop it from being vulnerable to the trusted insider. The other way that a cable system can be disrupted, like I said, the other way that a cable system can be interfered with is to disrupt it by cutting that flow of the data. Now, you could cut the cable, but that happens a lot. And because of that, there's a whole industry that fixes that problem. Why we think the cyber angle is the most concerning is because of the significant amount of disruption and the long-lasting disruption that you could cause, and you could do it remotely. So remember that network management system? Because us humans like to be efficient these days, so subsea cable systems used to be isolated, but because of things like COVID and work from home, the network management system can now be accessed remotely. So network engineers access that system remotely. Vendors who operate the network, who I won't say operate, who manage the network, manage the software upgrades to the network equipment, they can access it remotely. The NOCs, who may be in various places around the world, the network operation centers, they can access it remotely as well. So what's the possibility of accessing that system? The attack surface has widened. Now, whether you access it via cyber or you have a trusted insider that can now access the core of your network, I don't think it matters, but the cyber portion, it means you can do it remotely. And what that means with that access is you could override safeguards that could cause the destruction of large portions of a subsea cable system. And we know that's bad because we saw it in 2022 in Tonga. So Tonga, when the volcano exploded and the undersea currents took out both the international and domestic cable systems in Tonga, the domestic cable system took 18 months to return to service. And that was nothing to do with the availability of a repair ship. Most of that time was Tonga waiting for their cable to be manufactured, including the repeaters, in a workshop in France and then delivered to Tonga. So that's why the destruction of large portions of a cable system is a significant threat. Now, how likely is a cyber attack? Well, we know about the cyber threat actor, Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon. Those threat actors, they were in telecommunication. We know they target telecommunication networks. We know from ASIO threat assessments that there are adversaries targeting our telecommunications critical infrastructure. So the threats are there. But it's not just intentional attacks. If we think about what has happened over the last couple of years or even weeks, we've seen outages due to software upgrades. And if we talk about the last 2 weeks, now we have the threat of rogue AI agents. So the threats are real, intentional or not. I'm going to pass over to Sam.
Really want to thank National Security College, Rory, Justin, Sharon, and the team for putting all of this together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch on 3 points here. I'm going to touch on supply chain, on some sensing, and how we should work with our international partners. Now, when it comes to cable security and cable protection, the physical element is one part, the cyber is one part, but we should also think about the supply chains, because what we're seeing now is a parallel battle over the supply chain for these critical infrastructures. We're seeing Chinese firms on the one side, backed by China's Belt and Road, and Western suppliers on the other, so US Subcom, France's Alcatel Submarine Networks, and Japan's NEC. And what we're really seeing in this another dimension to subsea cable security is this battle for ownership and control of networks with espionage and service continuity fears. And we've seen Quad states such as Australia, of course, banning all Chinese kit from our networks, but many of our partner countries have not. And we see immense efforts at quote-unquote clean networks and removing this espionage and cyber exposure to cables. So when we think about cables being severed or indeed hacked, we should also think about who owns, who operates, and who controls these networks and what might happen in a conflict. And this is a recommendation we make in the report about continued DFAT funding for clean networks, whether it be in the Pacific, as has been done previously, or indeed elsewhere. The second point I want to touch on is really powerful new sensing technology that's being installed. And essentially, submarine cables are no longer just passive infrastructures for transmitting data from terrestrial points, but a range of new technologies are being fitted to these submarine cable networks. And these broadly come under this fiber sensing category. And these really change the nature of submarine cable networks from these passive data conduits to sensing networks and able to detect objects and events, whether that be ships or whether that be mines being placed on cables, for example, in real time. And this is using the glass as a sensor. Importantly, when the cables went out in Perth, when there was a shunt fault, so damage to the cables just on Saturday night, the owner, Bevan Slattery, said, if I had this technology installed on the cables, I would have been able to respond much faster and perhaps even have been able to avert this incident. But he didn't have that installed on those exact cables. But this has really important dual use implications because, of course, the same data that can sense a fishing trawler vessel can sense a submarine, for example. And we really recommend that these techs are installed and mandated on cable networks. And I highlight this as this is one of the avenues of further research that we're pursuing. The final point I want to make here is that it's not only good enough for Australia to protect its submarine cable networks, but we need to work with our partners to connect to protect their cable networks, because essentially cables run somewhere, and if we're looking after our patch, it's simply not good enough. In the report, we make recommendations across different regions. So in the Pacific, we really recommend continued capacity building and continued funding for trusted cable networks. Many connections to countries are not commercially viable, and we need to continue the good work to provide those trusted alternatives. Southeast Asia is in many senses the epicenter for submarine cable competition. And the South China Sea has really been blockaded, I would argue. The seabed has been blockaded within China's 9-, or not China's, but within the 9- line. And we see decisions about suppliers made in Southeast Asia have implications not just in that part of the world, but also globally, as it is this transit point for data at a global scale. When it comes to Europe, we really see a lot of lessons that can be learnt from the Baltic. Baltic have really been at the sharp end of the spear in many respects, and really important updates when it comes to seabed warfare doctrine, monitoring and patrol happening in Europe and especially in the Baltic. I'd touch on the Indian Ocean as well, which is in many respects the most underappreciated of Australia's approaches. India isn't funding cable networks like Japan, the US, and Australia are doing often in concert. And I really think there's huge opportunities for Australia to work with our Indian Ocean partners to both secure the cables and also on the supply chain side. And before I wrap up, I want to highlight that this report didn't come from a vacuum. And as Rory mentioned, this is one of the major deliverables of our Department of Defence project, Defending Seabed Critical Infrastructure, that I lead. And this is based at the Australia-India Institute, but ANU National Security College are partners, as well as UNSW Canberra. David's mentioned the authors, but I also want to highlight Amanda Watson, who couldn't be here tonight, who has a fantastic box on Pacific issues from the from ANU, and also Tony Press of the University of Tasmania, who's written a pullout on Antarctica. But I also want to highlight that it's not just this report. Sue Thompson, who's here in the room, has a forthcoming article, The Other All-British Route Between Australia and Britain, the Indian Ocean Cable and Australia's Imperial Communications 1876 to 1901. David Lee of UNSW Canberra, who's penned Defending Australia's Offshore Oil and Gas Infrastructure 1966 to 2004, and has amazing cabinet documents about special forces being deployed to Sale Air Force Base to protect gas infrastructure in the Bass Strait. As well as the other authors of short analysis papers who are here in the room. I also want to highlight too, we have flyers outside. Just this week I published the short book titled Submarine Cables with Cambridge University Press's Elements in Indo-Pacific Security. This takes a step back to try and understand what is it about submarine cables that make these so highly prized assets and vulnerable, and categorizes how states in the Indo-Pacific are responding. And this is fully open access online. Physical copies are available in bookstores, and I'd really recommend that, as long as along with our report, Connected and Protected. And we really hope that this will be a resource and a standard for the years to come on this issue.